Okay, think about inequality. Think about a mathematical equation. When you have a mathematical equation and two sides aren't equal, you have an inequality. And typically what has to happen? One side is higher than the other side. So you have to figure out how to bring one side down and the other side up. It's the only way they're going to be equal, right? So if you're working out an equation and you're looking for something that to be equal, right? One side is equaling the other side, right? And let's say you got, -5 on one side, but then the other side is telling you have +5. Well, what's going to happen? They're either going to have to meet in the middle, or you're going to have to, drop down, right? Um, but for the most part, that's only in the world of math. When it comes to humanity, unfortunately, this is not how human beings operate. Um, there's only so many resources globally, and that translates down to lifestyle. So there's only a handful of certain lifestyles. What do I mean? In America, only so many people can be middle class. Only so many people can be upper class, lower income, poverty, and all the areas in between, right? It's already fixed, right? Those are, I don't want to say set in stone, but, it is what it is. If somebody was ambitious enough and they wanted to actually do a study on how many middle class jobs we have or how many middle class neighborhoods we have, they could do it. They could actually come up with a estimate, right? Um, so with that being said, there is no utopia where everybody can eat. There is no utopia where everybody can sit down and, sing kumbaya, yada, yada, yada. No. So because of that, people have decided to make sure that they have certain advantages or certain privileges. This was done a long time ago. So now what we're doing, right, is just pretty much running a system that was already created. So we don't know how this engine works or how it moves. All we know that it was created, right, and we're holding on to it. Now the hopes is that if you get more people to be exposed to the system that we play and how it promotes a sort of inequality, it's going to change. I'm saying no. That's not human nature. Because unfortunately, to get somebody to change, right, you're telling them that you may have to give up any advantage that they may have so that others can have a better shot, right? But with doing so, you're putting them in a position where they may be left out in the cold. Because once again, there's only a certain amount of lifestyles in America, right? So what I'm trying to say is that even if you make people aware of the certain advantages and privileges that they may have, right, it's not going to get them to give it up. They're not going to give it up, right, considering the fact that only so many people can eat, and they'd rather be eating, right, as opposed to not eating, right, especially if it's a situation where there's no blood on their hands. Let me tell a family that, hey, you guys have money because your grandfather was a smuggler or a drug dealer. But regardless of that fact, the money that you have is legit. No one can come through and take it away. And let's see if they're going to give that money up. Give that lifestyle up because their father, was a smuggler or whatever. They're not going to. They can be upset, have a certain viewpoint towards their grandfather or whatnot, but it's not going to it's not going to create this idea that we have to give up our cushiony lifestyle, right? Or let me come through and tell, and here's another example. All the time, I have a whole bunch of professors that love to talk about white privilege, especially white male privilege, which is cool, right? But when it came down to get hired, I didn't see them give up their job for the Latino guy that didn't get hired. right? Or the black woman that didn't get hired, or the black guy that didn't get hired, right? You got your job, right? And you weren't afraid to take the privileges given to you, right? Why? Because you got to eat. You have your family to take care of. See, it's easy to talk about white privilege when you've already tasted from it. You know, when you've already taken your fair share of it. Then to turn around and talk about how we have to do away with it and have a more equal system. But first, you wanted to take whatever advantages you can get out of it. You got your advantage first. See, that's the problem, right? It's like a movie theater. Only so many people can, have a seat at the movie theater, right? So if you have the hookups, if you have somebody in line, what happens? They get in before and they save you a couple of seats, right? And can it be unfair? Yeah, people are waiting, right? But I've seen it where and we've done this before. We'll send two people, right? Hey, man, you need to save 8, chairs or whatnot. People waiting out, you know, 2 hours or whatnot, right? We show up maybe 30 minutes or whatnot, and we already have our seats saved. Now, is it fair for those who've been waiting longer? No, it's not fair, right? Everybody should have a good seat. But am I going to give up the seat that I already have? No, I'm going to be sitting down and I'm like, oh man, that's not fair, man. Everybody should have a seat. I'm not going to give up my seat, right? I'm not going to give up the advantage that I have. And that's life, right? And that's how we operate. See, we can make Jimmy and Julie cry and feel sorry about what they were born into and how they got their power and how they got their privilege and how they have to change how they think, right? But when it comes down to giving up their spot in line, knowing that they're ahead of everybody else and they have the advantage, that's not going to happen, right? And they may talk about inequality after they've already, partaken in their advantage. But once again, there's only so many spots. So they're taken care of, right? So we can talk about inequality all we want, but you already took advantage of your advantage, right? You already took those slots that we can't have. You can make Julie and Jim cry about what their ancestors did or whatnot, right? But at best, what are you going to get them to do? Maybe cry a little bit, donate some more money during the holidays, or let's say when they get into their positions of power and they hook everybody else up, then they may consider giving the black guy a job. Hey, let's have some sympathy for the black guy. Let's give him a job. But let me make sure that I'm eating first. See, this is what people don't understand, right? When people have these concepts of equality and everybody's holding hands and everybody can have their fair share, you're assuming that there's a infinite amount of lifestyles in America. Everybody can be middle class or everybody can be upper class. No. In reality, only so many people can get in, right? It's just like musical chairs. Only so many people can have a chair. And if you have an advantage, you're not going to give it up, especially when there's no blood on your hands, right? We can talk about slavery and racism and how that benefits other groups. But those groups are going to say, I didn't do it. There's no blood on my hands. And I'm not going to give up my position. This is what they're saying. It may be indirect, but that's what they're still saying, right? So I have no problems in us talking about equality, right, and trying to be more equitable and whatnot. But you have to understand that talking about it isn't going to bring about that change because it's still a competition. I don't like it any better than anybody else. But this is a competition, right? It's a competition because people subconsciously understand that there's only so many people that can have that job or that can have that career. It's a competition, right? And I wish that black people would put more time in understanding the ugly side of humanity, right, as opposed to this kumbaya shit. right? Because it's people that will come through and say, yeah, equality, equality, it should be fair, but it's not stopping them from partaking from that advantage. Like I said before, for those that went to college, how many professors did you have that want to talk about privilege and this, that, and the third? Right? Well, how come you're not giving up your job for Jamal who can't find a work? Right? Or Marisol who's looking for a job, and she has her PhD in this, but she can't get hired. Right? That didn't stop you from taking your position. Right? And that's life. So it is about competition and competing. See, minority groups, especially the black community, right? We get fed this sort of, let's go for equalness and fairness. And it takes away from the mentality that you have to have. Right? It does. It takes away from you wanting to compete. And that is a form of keeping the status quo the status quo. The people who are, who don't have as many, who don't have the advantage, right? Who don't enjoy certain privileges. Let's get them to believe that you can get a fair shot if you do the whole fairness, equality, and point out how we're less likely to get called back, this, that, and the third, right? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't do much other than instill, let's say, white guilt. But once again, white guilt isn't enough to get some people to change. It's not going to open up the door for them to give up their advantage or to give up whatever privileges they may enjoy directly or indirectly. It's not going to, right? So I'm not saying that it shouldn't be covered, but what I'm trying to say is you're only going to increase where you are through competition, right? Because those that hold certain privileges and advantages aren't going to give it up. It's human nature because everybody can't eat. Everybody can't eat. So when we can continue to have this idea that everybody can eat, kumbaya, we're going to continue to be where we are. Right? This is the world we live in. Unfortunately, I don't like it as much as you may not like it, but it's the reality. We're all fighting for some spots that are fixed. So anyways, I wanted to do this one because it's really important to me. Because time after time, I don't think people understand what we have to do to move up, right? And who we have to displace. So if there's only 10 chairs, all those 10 chairs are accounted for, and there's people waiting in line. So the only way we're going to get to one of those 10 chairs is if, hey, we scrap for it. Whether we like that mentality or not, that's how we're going to move up. Right? You look at other minority groups that enjoy a certain power, even, if you want to include Jewish people, which I have a hard time doing considering that they can still assimilate in, right? My problem with Jews is that they'll complain about how they've been treated, but you still got let in the door, right? It's like me having a club that says whites only, right? And, non-white people come through and I'm like, you can't get in. But here comes a Jew person, and it's like a Jewish person is like, you can come in, right? We're just going to talk about you behind your back, going back to how assimilation works. Let me take in anybody that can physically and racially assimilate, right? And we're going to add you to the collective pot, even though we may not like you and your culture and your religion. But for the most part, your minority groups weren't hooked up. So there was no deal where we're like, we're going to be equal with Indian people, or we're going to be equal with Middle Eastern people or Asian people. No, there's that idea we have to compete. We have to knock somebody off. If we as Asian people want to have one of those 10 or 20 chairs, right, we got to, make power moves, right? Because us getting, let's say, 2 or 3 chairs means that some white person isn't going to get it. Right, so we have to outcompete them, right? Because they're not going to they're not going to give up any advantage that they have. So we just have to hustle. We got to get it together. We have to be on point. We can't sit back and ask the people who are already sitting down to, hey, let's be equal, right? Let's give up whatever advantage that you have so that this table can be more diverse. Nope, not going to happen, right? We can't bring in 100 new chairs so that everybody can sit down. There's only a set amount of chairs, so, if you have some advantage, you're going to hold on to it. And if you're trying to sit down, you got to grind. You got to hustle. You got to do what you have to do, right? So that's my vid. Y'all take it easy. God bless.